Uniform Securities Act starts out by stating its purpose, and it says that it relates to securities and it tries to prevent fraudulent practices in the securities industry. It tries to get persons in the industry registered. That's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. As you can see, registration of persons. We could be talking in these questions about broker-dealers and their agents, or investment advisors and their investment advisor representatives. The definitions, which are pulled right out of the Uniform Securities Act, remember that's a template for state securities law. We need to know what a broker-dealer is, and first the concept. The broker-dealer is in the transaction business for securities. They hold people's assets in many cases, and they help people buy and sell securities. It could be on the primary market because they're helping to complete an offering called an IPO or a bond offer, or just as likely they could be helping people purchase mutual funds or trade securities on the secondary market. So they're in the transaction business, unlike the advisory industry. They're in the business of effecting or completing transactions in securities for the account of others or its own account. Broker would be acting for the account of others. If they're dealing or acting as a market maker, then they obviously have a proprietary account and they're trading for their own account. As you've probably seen in other lessons, in any transaction the firm either acted as a broker or a dealer. And this firm, for example MetLife Securities or Morgan Stanley, they register with a form BD, broker-dealer, and then the associated persons are the principals and the agents. An agent represents a broker-dealer or an issuer. If the individual represents a broker-dealer and gets compensated for completing securities transactions, that individual is an agent. Sometimes an agent will represent an issuer. So if a local company is going to be offering securities over the next year, and that includes even to retail investors, any individual who's going to be involved in getting compensation is going to have to be an agent of the issuer. So the agent would associate usually with a broker-dealer, sometimes with the issuer, with a form U4. An issuer is any person, which could be sole proprietor, LLC, government, any individual or entity that issues or proposes to issue any security. It could be a well-known seasoned issuer like Starbucks, or it could be somebody trying to commit fraud or take people's money without registering the securities and hoping nobody finds out, which is pretty much the same thing. Alright, so if you're getting a Series 7 or a Series 6 license, you would be registering as an agent once you pass your test, and then they review your U4 information to make sure there are no major red flags there. A broker-dealer forms the entity by having the owners and those who are going to run the firm listed on various schedules, and if they have any red flags, FINRA or the SEC may not let them operate. And then when an issuer goes to raise money, usually through a broker-dealer, in other words, if we're doing our IPO, we're the issuing company and we have a broker-dealer acting as the lead underwriter, and the individuals who work for that broker-dealer are calling customers, and we call these individuals agents. So that's the necessary layer of the securities industry. There's always a broker-dealer involved. Some clients will also want to use an investment advisor. I myself don't use an advisor, but I could become one. I've passed the test recently if I want to set up a business that manages portfolios or provides financial planning, or if we did consulting services for large pension funds, for example, we would register as an investment advisor. Maybe it would be Walker Wealth Management. Maybe we would have a better name. I don't know. But the firm is compensated not for selling securities to people, and we're not getting paid to do the trade. We're getting paid to tell you what to do or do it for you. So if we're issuing a financial plan to you for $300 an hour, we hope you implement it, but frankly, you owe us either way. And if we manage your portfolio, I'm not sure how often we'll be trading it, but we don't get paid per trade. We get paid as a percentage of assets. So if we do a good job and your account assets go up, so will our advisory fee. So Walker Wealth Management LLC will be the registered investment advisory firm. We then need individuals like some of you to go get clients. Maybe we'll get 100 basis points per client and you guys will get 30 basis points plus various bonuses. Well, you'd be getting compensated then for selling the services of the firm, or maybe some of you would be the portfolio managers managing accounts, either making recommendations or helping to determine those recommendations, or if you're supervising these people. Does that mean that every employee of an advisor is an investment advisor rep? No, we would exclude ministerial persons if they're, for example, just dealing with the office equipment, or they're a secretary, or they're a receptionist. If they don't get involved with the investing side of the business itself, then they're probably not an IR. Well, a broker-dealer is not an agent, and the advisor is not the advisor rep. Remember that. That might help you get a couple easy questions there. Conceptually, when we work later with conflicts of interest, I think one of the best ways to remember it is that an advisor is a different relationship to the client than a broker-dealer. A broker-dealer sits on the sell side of the table. That's just a way of thinking of it. They are often selling product, and if the product is suitable, everything's fine. But the broker-dealer is pretty much like any other company. We're bringing investment options. Sometimes people come to your house and show you curtains or flooring options, as opposed to an advisor who's on the same side of the table with clients. And that's why, since they're already getting usually a percentage of assets or maybe an hourly rate to do a financial plan, we're already getting compensated to advise you. So the transactions that we do for you or talk you into, if we're getting an extra benefit on any of those, we have to disclose the potential conflict of interest. For example, we're putting your money into some of our other LLCs. Well, we better disclose that. Or I also have a Series 7. Sometimes we put your money into mutual funds that pay me compensation. I need to let you know that. All right, so let's start with broker-dealers and agents. A broker-dealer is not the agent and is not the issuer. So if you remember that slide, we had broker-dealer, agent, and issuer. Well, the broker-dealer, by definition, is not an agent, is not the issuer. A lot of broker-dealers are related to banks, but a broker-dealer is not a bank or a savings institution or a trust company. These broker-dealers, and this would also apply to their agents, would not have to register in a particular state if they had no physical place of business in that state. And then, so remember, it's and then. A lot of people want to rush through it, and you'll get a question about who the clients are. Well, we don't care who the clients are yet, the customers, until we first determine this is a broker-dealer. Maybe they're in the state of Wisconsin. They do not have a place of business in Kentucky. If that's the case, then they can do business with these people in Kentucky without having to register. Without having to register at all? No, without having to register in Kentucky. In other words, if they're doing the IPO and they're doing business with the issuer of the securities, they don't have to register to do that. Or if they're trading with other broker-dealers, the administrator's not out to protect those broker-dealers. He's out to protect the investors from broker-dealers. So all of these institutional investors or the issuers involved in the transaction should know what they're doing, and probably do, so they don't need so much protection from the state. Remember, it provides necessary protection. Well, these insurance companies and investment companies, they could have a broker-dealer in another state executing transactions for them without Kentucky, in this case, having to put up a big wall of protection. So it's kind of a flow chart that might help you through a practice question or an actual question at the testing center. If we're a broker-dealer, we're trying to figure out if we have to register in Kentucky, or the test might call it State B. The first question the state regulator would always have, do you have a place of business in the state? Yes, we do. Oh, well, then that's a very short conversation. In fact, unless you're talking about an investment advisory firm, if that's the answer, it's always this short of a conversation. Agent, broker-dealer, IAR. If you have a place of business in my state, you will have to register. But if you don't have a place of business, you might have an exemption. Don't confuse with the advisory side. There is no number here. We're just saying, do you effect transactions with any non-institutional customers, any retail investors? If not, you're still exempt. I mean, that really makes sense, right? You're not in my state. You may do business with people who know what they're doing, but you're not doing transactions with people who need my protection. You would be exempt. However, even if you're not in my state, if you are doing business with any retail investors who live here, then you'll have to get registered here. So it actually does make sense. If you're in my state as a broker-dealer, you will have to register in my state as a broker-dealer. But we don't make everybody register. It really depends on how much protection I have to provide to the investors in my state. If you're only going to deal with the big institutions, you're going to affect transactions for one of the large pension funds in my state, we won't make you register. But if one of your customers from Wisconsin moves to Kentucky, if you want to keep that account, you'll have to get registered here. And of course, so would the agent dealing with the account. Agents are not broker-dealers. Broker-dealers are not agents. I mean, we don't want to get all philosophical, but an agent represents a broker-dealer or represents an issuer, so the agent can't be the broker-dealer and vice versa. An agent could represent the issuer directly. Now, sometimes an individual will represent an exempt security, or, they'll work for the U.S. Treasury Department selling T-notes for no commissions. They're just an employee. But if they represent a broker-dealer, then they're going to have to register. But there are 5 types of exempt securities, and you'll need to get that from your textbook. But for example, the municipals and the bank securities and the treasury securities, if you're really just an employee of that issuer getting no special compensation, you're not meeting the definition of an agent. Or if you represent the issuer in any exempt transaction. So I could actually hire some of you to find institutional investors. Some of you work for insurance companies or banks. If we can get them to buy a percentage of my company, I can issue the common stock to them, and you would not be considered an agent because you're representing me, the issuer, in an exempt transaction. Or it says the individual selling the issuer's securities. Basically, let's picture somebody working in human resources, and she's the person we can call if we want to buy stock in the company through our 401k or profit sharing plan. Does she get a commission? Well, let's hope not. I mean, if she wants this exemption or this exclusion, she's not getting paid per transaction. She's just probably a salaried employee. She's also not meeting the definition of an agent. So think of what an agent implies. Somebody coming in to represent somebody, they're going to get compensated for selling securities in a case where we need to protect the investors. That's who has to register. But if you're going to work for the United States Treasury, answering emails or the phone when people want to figure out how to reinvest the interest payment on their T-note, you're not getting any commissions, you're not initiating any phone calls, you're not even sounding like an agent. Agents and broker-dealers are the same when it comes to exemptions. If you're not in the state, we'll let you deal with institutions, but we won't let you deal with customers who are, whatever the test might call them, non-institutional investors or retail. Now, if they're just here for a few weeks, that's one thing, but if they move to Maryland, you want to keep this customer, don't do it under the table, get registered in Maryland, or cut them loose. All right, so you're an agent with existing customers in Indiana, and for 2 weeks they're going to be staying in Kentucky at their fishing cabin. If you call them and you offer them a variable annuity that is a security, would you have to register in Kentucky to do that? The answer is no, they're not Kentucky residents. Okay, but another question might say, are you subject to the anti-fraud authority of the administrator in Kentucky? Yeah, just like those two are when they're driving through Kentucky, the state troopers will pull them over if they're going too fast, but they won't require them to get a license. It's going to be different though if you want to call a Kentucky resident. You want to offer a security to a Kentucky resident, you'd have to get registered in Kentucky first. Maybe the security doesn't, but you do as an agent. So agents and broker-dealers who are not in Kentucky can have all the institutional customers they want. Other broker-dealers, pension funds, insurance companies, banks, etc. But we're not going to let them do transactions or open accounts for retail customers. And if they use the number 3 or 4, they might be trying to confuse you with advisors. You can't deal with any individual humans who live in Kentucky as an agent or a broker-dealer unless you get registered there. All right, this may be a review for some of you, but the way we break down the styles of the hard questions, they can either be sorted as tricky, where they're trying to mislead you. They set up a pattern and then use that against you, just like a magician, really. That's why they call it tricky, right? Chatty could be too many words. Some of them are unnecessary, or sometimes it's just a very long-winded question. That can make people very nervous, and I notice in tutoring that if it's a chatty question, people will often read it 2 or 3 times. And pretty soon it's like, wow, you do that long enough, it's not even going to matter if you get them right. You can't spend more than a minute per question on the 63. So on the 63, the chatty question would probably become a bigger problem than on most other tests, because the 63 is the only one that moves kind of quickly. I'm not saying you have to rush through it, but you really only have about a minute per question. Needlessly negative, you'll get a lot of that, I think, on the 63, because the act itself is written with negative words. I mean, the SEC or the state regulators will say an investment advisor, must be sure that its advice is always disinterested, and if it cannot provide advice that is not disinterested, and then pretty soon there's so many negative words that you're not sure if they're asking, wait, you want to know if it's okay or if it's prohibited. So that's obviously why we're going to do 4 of those together, like all the other styles today. Falsely familiar, it might be a familiar phrase, or those of you who've been studying, there's something about Canadian governments. Yeah, but what they really said in the question might have been a Canadian company, or just the fact that the stock trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Well, am I supposed to conclude that's a Canadian government? That's probably the falsely familiar angle that they're playing. Roman numerals on the 63, well, that's a godsend. If I could take the whole test with Roman numerals, I could get out probably 15 minutes faster. But I think a lot of people would not enjoy it. Is it 1 and 2? Is it 3 and 4? Oh, I don't know. It's actually the easiest type of question to take apart. I think the reason that people have trouble with Roman numerals is that they haven't made the big switch in their approach to test taking. They're still taking tests as they did in college. College was more of a test of, did you go to class, take notes, and study? Here it's like, well, yeah, you better have done that. But we're also going to see if you can handle some unfamiliar questions and get to the meaning of the law, and to come up with some ethical situations that almost no one could have anticipated. But here you have it, and apparently we feel as the regulators that if you know this material, you can figure it out, even though it's an unfamiliar question. So a lot of people haven't made the transition to what we're trying to teach here. No matter which of these 5 types we're going to look at on the test, and of course some of them aren't hard at all. There will be some, it's just 3 years or 5 years. There'll be a few of those, but that's not enough to even make a difference to your score. This is how the hard questions are posed, and no matter what they do and which one you encounter, you're just trying to eliminate wrong answers. Is there a right answer? Well, yeah, but more importantly, you have to identify the 3 wrong answers. And if you can do that, your score should go way up. I mean, you're not going to be caught with so many tricks. The needlessly negative isn't even going to be that hard, because you're just saying, oh, okay, well, what you're really saying is 3 of these are true, so why don't I work on that? In other words, you have to consider all 4 answer choices, and you're trying to find the 3 that don't work. It's nothing like rocket science, but it's kind of an art that a lot of people didn't have to do in college. If you work twice as hard as the people on either side of you, unless they were genius level, you almost always got a better grade. And the A students may or may not have been the brightest, but they certainly outworked most of the C students, you'd have to think, right? Well, reading the book 3 times isn't going to be the ticket here. You're going to read it, and you'll probably go back and reread certain parts as you take practice questions, but you have to become a much better test taker to pass the 6 and maybe more of the Series 63. So let's let you do this here on your own, and then I'll break it down in about 20 seconds for the live audience. I just noticed that this is probably the perfect example of why you need to make that transition that I was just talking about. Back in college, and I'm not trying to
lump all college courses together. I was not an engineering major, but I was either psychology or humanities. And in those tests, if I see the word advises, that's pretty much got to tell me, hey, it's got to be either A or D. Well, that's the trick. It may or may not be an investment advisor. And if you're going to the testing center thinking, well, obviously, if it says the word advises, it has to be an advisor. No, you must be at the wrong exam. This thing is much more sophisticated than that. It's not going to give you two ridiculous answers or some little trick where, well, obviously it has to be A or D. I mean, it could be, I suppose. Or what you could do is say, okay, the answer choices are investment advisor, broker dealer, or both. Even bank is a little tempting because in the news media, they want to sound hip. So if you're Goldman Sachs, you're a bank. Yeah, but when they're taking Facebook public, they're an investment banker, Well, beyond that, I see raising capital and expanding, and I know my uncle's business was always expanding when he went to the bank. That would be the kind of study, or that'd be a kind of person who hadn't studied at all. This is a financial services firm. Well, actually, I guess it could be a bank. So they advise corporate issuers. Okay, issuer. If you remember our training video, that's on the same screen with the broker-dealer, the agent, and the issuer. And an issuer is any person who issues or proposes to issue any security. I'm going to have to get that in a second, but just a minute. Investment advisor looks very tempting, but you have to say, well, are they actually helping people invest in securities for compensation? And then you realize, no, they're not. They're actually not acting as an investment advisor at all. They're an investment banker. That's where the bank is kind of a trick. But like Goldman Sachs or Morgan, when you do this, you're an investment banker, which means you're a broker-dealer. So it's tempting to go with advisor. Turns out that is not the right answer. All right, let me give you a few seconds to do this one. Okay, my scheduling was less than ideal with the work crew here. Never really done a build out before in an office. Oh well. So again, tricky. If we plant the term advises, now I'm not saying, hey, this is a secret. If they say that, it's really the opposite. I'm really just doing this as an eye opener. The fact that there's the word advises here and investment advisor there should not get you excited in any way. It may or may not be relevant. And it's a trick. It's trying to get people to lock into A or D. And D, it's kind of funny to take that answer. It's like, well, you really didn't know. You just figured, I'll go 50-50, So if it were a broker-dealer, they could either be selling mutual funds or executing trades, or doing this. Not all broker-dealers are investment bankers, but the really big, well-known firms all do that. Okay, chatty. Yeah, I don't even want to read this. Okay. And it's very convenient for the test to have these really long titles. Now, there are 3 or 4 of the model rules, or some of them are called policy statements. What does that mean? Well, we're the Organization of State Regulators, and we have a new issue in the industry. We've met and discussed, and we've had a panel, and now we're going to draft a model rule, which you states could either just adopt, or you could use it to write your own. And from what I can see, usually the states just use it. So here, these are going to be the big sins, so to speak, of the advisory world. So which of the following is accurate? You want to save yourself time on the 63 and be a good reader. If it's, if you're turning the word inaccurate into accurate, that is not close enough. Well, this is about discretion. Discretion's a little tricky because the big picture is that both broker-dealers and then the investment advisory business, those are 2 different business models. Again, we're in the transaction business. We're going to raise money for Facebook, and we're going to keep a percentage. When that stock gets sold for 38, we keep like 42 cents. That's how that works. We do a transaction. Over here, we're an investment advisor. We help people invest in securities for compensation. So they're different business models. It's very common. In fact, if you're a portfolio manager, you have to have discretion in the investment advisory business. But the point is, you have to get it legally and in writing. You don't just assume it. With a broker-dealer, discretion is not that common. In fact, in my mind, it doesn't even make sense. It's like, look, if you, well, no, I take that back, actually. It makes perfect sense. If you could trust your stockbroker as much as your advisor, you would save a ton of money. I'm having a flash here, people. You would save a ton of money because you would only have to pay if and when he or she did a trade, and you're just letting them manage your portfolio for a much lower amount. Because an investment advisor is going to want probably 1% for a stock portfolio. You got up to 5 million, we charge 100 basis points. So I'm going to manage your portfolio, and if I'm your advisor, I need discretion so that I can trade as I see fit. But I got to get it in writing. Broker-dealer would definitely have to get it in writing. And then here's where it gets different. Broker-dealer has to have it in writing before any trade is placed. For whatever reason, the industry allows an investment advisor to receive oral authority, and then whenever he places the first trade pursuant to that, then he has 10 business days to get it in writing. And if he doesn't get it in writing, or the firm, they don't get it in writing, then they automatically do not have discretion. Okay. Or you could probably just be smart and never trust a client to back you up. Right. But if you're an advisor, you could have orally granted authority, and then it would last for 10 business days after the first trade. If you tried to do that as a broker-dealer or agent, well, the guy said it was in the mail, you'd be in trouble with FINRA and the state regulators. So broker-dealers do have to get it in writing before the first trade, but investment advisors also have to get it, if not right away, eventually. So then it says only advisors affiliated with a broker-dealer may exercise discretion. No. A lot of portfolio managers are not affiliated with a broker-dealer. They would open up an account with a broker-dealer so they could place their trades for all of their clients, but that's different. I said that they can rely on orally granted discretionary authority, while broker-dealers must secure the authority in writing prior to the first transaction. Now, again, back the way we took tests in college, that would be the answer because it's just so familiar to what I just said. Well, we aren't in college anymore, people. IAs, investment advisors, must secure discretionary authority in writing within 10 business days of execution of the first transaction. Now, that sounds really familiar. IAs, unlike broker-dealers, may exercise discretion. No, I said enough about the broker-dealer that we know they could both do it. Now, if you go back to B, which looked right. IAs may rely on it, while the broker-dealer has to secure it in writing. That's close to being true, but it makes it sound like they can just rely on it. Whereas with C, they must secure the authority in writing within 10 business days of execution of the first transaction. And there's nothing wrong with C. So B could be interpreted to suggest that the IA can rely on it indefinitely, whereas C says it exactly right. Now that's a pretty hard question, but I've seen them at least that hard on the 63.
For the rest of the Series 63 video lessons and the test taking strategy sessions, visit www.examzone.com.